Hey guys, so I just literally today, not too long ago, got back from vacation back in New York. I had a great time there, and as is my wont, I acquired a lot of books. Uh, I acquired around something like 30 books while I was there. Now, in my defense, the vast majority of them I did not pay anything for because they were either books that I took from my parents' house that were mine and that I just wanted to take back with me, or they were given to me, or I just found them for free. But the ones that I paid for, I will be telling you about. But I'm gonna do this haul a bit differently. I'm gonna do it in parts, just because there are so many books and they all came from different places. I thought it would be nice to do them a bit differently so I can talk about a few things. I have one of the videos is going to be a haul from a bookstore in Albany, New York, that I want to talk a little bit about. So, but those books haven't actually arrived yet. I had them shipped to me from that bookstore. That was one of the only places where I actually spent money on books. But that haul will be coming a little bit later when the books actually arrive. But for this first section of this haul, I thought I would do the books that I grabbed while I was at home. So these are books that either were mine and that I just left at home and wanted to take with me, or they were books that my parents were getting rid of and just told me that I could sort of, raid their bookshelves and take what I wanted. So I thought I would start with those. And I'll get right to it with one book that I actually have already read and just left at home, didn't take with me, but this is, sorry, that doesn't show very well because of the glare, but this is, The Golden Sayings of Epictetus. And, Epictetus is an old, Roman philosopher, Stoic philosopher, and there are just some really good quotes in this book that I love. It really is just a collection of his quotes, really. It's not anything too substantial, but I love books like this. And I have a few of the quotes in here, in my commonplace book, and a little bookmark in it, too. So, anyway, so next I have, medieval romances. Yeah, this just has, several, romances that I, am very interested in. It has Tristan and Isolde by, Gottfried von Strasbourg. It has, The Percival by, Chrétien de Troyes, I think his name is pronounced. It actually has Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, which I've already read. And it has a few others. It has a telling of the story of Orpheus. It has a romance about Alexander the Great, which would be cool. And then it has the Book of Balin, which is taken from Les Morts d'Arthur by Thomas Malory. So yeah, just a nice little collection. I will chip away at these. And next I have several plays. So first we have a bunch of Harold Pinter. So here we have The Birthday Party and The Room by Harold Pinter. It's the bind-up of the two plays. And I've read both of these, and neither of them, I didn't love either of them, but they're two plays that I could see myself definitely rereading, and it'll be nice to have them in an individual volume because the Harold Pinter plays that I do have are in this bind-up of, like, his complete works. So it's nice to just have these individual volumes. And the next is also a bind-up of two plays. This is The Caretaker and The Dumb Waiter. Two plays that I have not read and that I really want to. The Caretaker I have heard really good things about. And I have Temptation by Václav Havel. And, yeah, I really like Václav Havel. I like his nonfiction. I like his plays. And this is supposed to be his take on the Faust legend, which I thought sounded super interesting. But I think it's set in communist Czechoslovakia. So that should be very interesting. Václav Havel is he's very sort of, influenced by the theater of the absurd. He's very much in the vein of, like, Samuel Beckett and Harold Pinter and, Albert Camus and others. So I really like his work. And then finally I have, The Glass Menagerie by Tennessee Williams. Which, yeah, I mean, this is, one of Tennessee Williams' great plays up there with, Streetcar Named Desire, among others. And I want to read more Tennessee Williams, so, yeah. Next is, I think, the only novel in this part of the haul. This is, Cloud Atlas by David Mitchell. I read this I read this a few years ago. It was actually one of the first books that really got me into reading. I think I've mentioned that before, but for anyone who hasn't heard me say it, this is one of the books I read early in my reading life that helped to get me really into reading. And I just love it. I love the movie that's based on it as well. So I probably need to reread this soon, because, yeah, I mean, I've forgotten a lot of it. So, but yeah, I love this novel. Next is a very interesting book. This is Rites of Spring, The Great War and the Birth of the Modern Age by Modris Ecksteins. Sorry, I struggled with that name. And this is just how World War I affected Western culture, essentially. The psychology of Western culture and also Western art. Which is a subject that I find fascinating because I love T.S. Eliot. And his work was very influenced by World War I, and basically all of the great modernist writers, Virginia Woolf, James Joyce, all of them were very influenced by World War I. And I think this also talks about, like, ballet and music and such. So, yeah, I think it's just generally about how World War I affected art, and also just more generally the way that the West thought about itself, which is something that I also find very interesting, thinking about in the wake of World War I. So, I thought that this sounded like a really interesting book. Next few are all autobiography or memoir, or biography. The first one here is a biography. This is Yeats, The Man and the Masks by Richard Ellman, who is the father. Richard Ellman is the father of Lucy Ellman, whose novel, Ducks Newburyport, I think it's called, was just nominated for the Booker Prize, and is, as far as I can tell, getting rave reviews from everyone on BookTube. So, but anyway, this is her father, who was a biographer of Yeats and James Joyce as well. But I'm starting to develop more of a taste for biographies, and especially literary biographies. And Yeats is a poet who I like but don't love. The few poems I like that he wrote, I do love dearly, but then the rest of his work I have had a hard time connecting with. So I'm sort of hoping that maybe this will help me get more into his wider oeuvre rather than just the few poems by him that I do love. Next one is Childhood, Youth, and Exile by Alexander Herzen. And Alexander Herzen was a Russian revolutionary thinker and activist. And he was exiled from Russia he was around in the 19th century when Russia was still ruled by the Tsars. And the back cover of this actually says that this is his memoir. And the back cover actually says that it stands up to the work of, Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, and Turgenev as, like, a pinnacle of Russian literature, which I think is super interesting. But what struck me about this when I saw it was that this book was mentioned in the biography of Nietzsche that I'm currently reading. It was a book that the author of the Nietzsche biography doesn't say that it had a huge influence on Nietzsche himself, but there were people around him who he interacted with who read it, and it very much influenced them. So when I saw this, it was such a coincidence, because this is my dad's book that I grabbed. So I thought it was such a coincidence that I saw it, the day after I read about it in that biography. But yeah, so now I can read that. And then lastly, or the last of the biographies and memoirs, I have On Writing by Stephen King. So, I mean, a hugely famous book. I read it a few years ago and actually really enjoyed it. The writing advice is pretty basic, I feel like, but I like that anyway, and I really liked the autobiography parts, him talking about his alcoholism and recovering from it, and just his personal life and such. So yeah, I do really like this book, and hope I will reread it at some point. It's funny, I've read this, and I really like it, but I have not read a single novel by Stephen King. It'll be interesting to see whether I ever actually do, because honestly, horror is not really something that I'm that into, but we shall see. And then the last three are kind of miscellaneous. First, I have René Descartes, Discourse on Method, one of his great influential philosophical works. Really slim thing. I read it a few years ago as well. This is another book that I read early in my reading life that, again, helped me get more into reading. I know, right? Like, who on earth says that one of the books that gets them into reading is, Discourse on Method by René Descartes? But anyway, I was a junior in college, so it was pretty normal. But yeah, so I read this a few years ago, and actually found it pretty dull. Even though I'm saying it helped me get more into reading, it was very intellectually stimulating, but it was pretty dull and ultimately not that fulfilling. But I would like to give it another try, perhaps. So yeah, I grabbed that. Another Václav Havel book. This is Letters to Olga, and these are letters that Václav Havel wrote to his wife Olga from prison. And he, as the dust jacket says, that he discusses all sorts of philosophical issues, all sorts of issues about living in an authoritarian regime, but they're supposed to be written in a very odd, sort of elusive, elliptical style, because obviously it was an authoritarian dictatorship. It was Czechoslovakia, so he couldn't write explicitly about his attitudes toward the government. So he wrote in a very sort of elliptical, elusive style in these letters, and I thought that sounded pretty interesting. And again, I'm just interested in Václav Havel. I really want to read as much of his work as I can, and hopefully at some point read a biography of him. So anyway, and then lastly, I have a anthology of poetry. This is The World's Best Poems. It's a lovely, lovely book with gold pages. And yeah, these are poems from all over the world. Which is why I liked it. So it has poems, has some English poems, but thankfully the majority of this is not taken up by English poems. Has Chinese poems, Japanese poems, Sanskrit poems, Arabian poems, Persian, Hebrew, Egyptian, Spanish, Italian, French, German, all sorts of stuff. And so I thought this looked like a really good anthology. So yeah, those are books that I took from home that were either mine or my parents. So as always, if you read any of these, give me your thoughts. And anyway, I will talk to you all in the next part of this haul video. So anyway, bye guys.